The forgotten act, the night sky above Los Angeles, was quiet, painted in shades of deep blue and gold. Cameras had stopped flashing, red carpets were rolled away, and the echo of applause had faded into silence. Yet in one corner of the city, far from the lights and fame, Keanu Reeves sat alone at a dimly lit diner. His motorcycle helmet rested beside him, untouched coffee growing cold. He stared through the window not at his reflection, but at the quiet street where a young man sat wrapped in a blanket, holding a cardboard sign that read, "Just one chance." That night, something stirred in Keanu's heart. He had seen thousands of faces during his career, fans, co-stars, strangers, but this young man's tired eyes reminded him of something he had once promised himself, that if he ever had the power to change one person's fate, he would. The bell above the diner door jingled. A familiar voice whispered gently, "You're still out here?" It was Sandra Bullock. She had finished a long shoot nearby and had recognized his bike outside. She smiled softly, but her smile faded when she saw where his eyes were fixed. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. "Someone the world stopped seeing?" Keanu replied. She followed his gaze and noticed the man trying to stay awake, his hands trembling from the cold. The world had given him no warmth, no comfort. Without another word, Keanu stood, paid the bill, and walked outside. Sandra hesitated before following. Keanu knelt beside the man. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" The man blinked slowly, as if unsure how to answer. "I used to be," he murmured. "Before I lost my job. Before people stopped believing I could get back up." Sandra listened silently, her heart heavy. Keanu reached into his jacket, took out a small folded paper, and wrote something down. "There's a workshop that trains people for film crew work. Go there tomorrow. They'll help you. Tell them Keanu sent you." The man looked up in disbelief. "Keanu? Like the actor?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Just Keanu. And one more thing. Don't give up, not tonight." He handed the man some cash for a motel and nodded gently before walking away. Sandra followed, still quiet. When they reached the corner, she finally spoke. "You didn't even ask his name." Keanu turned to her, his voice calm but full of emotion. "Sometimes you don't need a name to know someone needs kindness. Sometimes you just act." That night stayed with Sandra longer than she expected. She couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind. Sometimes you just act. She thought about her own life, her fame, and all the people who had helped her along the way. She realized how many times she had promised herself she would do more, but never found the time. The next morning, she went to the same diner. The man was gone. Only the folded cardboard sign remained, soaked in dew. Beside it was a receipt from the workshop Keanu had mentioned. He had actually gone. Sandra smiled to herself. Something inside her shifted that day. Weeks passed, and Sandra didn't mention that night again, not to her friends, not to reporters. But something quiet had awakened in her heart. She started volunteering more, visiting shelters in secret, listening to people who felt invisible. Every time she saw someone struggling, she remembered Keanu's calm voice saying, "Just act." What neither of them knew was that the man Keanu helped that night would soon become the thread that connected their lives in an unexpected way. One evening, Sandra received a letter. It had no return address, only a short note inside. "Thank you for being there that night. I got the job. They said Keanu sent me was all it took. Now I help others who come through that same door. You may not remember me, but I remember the kindness." She read it again and again, her eyes filling with tears. She realized this was more than coincidence. It was a sign. The smallest act had changed a life, and that life was now changing others. Later, she called Keanu. He answered softly. "Hey, Sandra. That man you helped," she said, voice trembling. "He's okay. He's helping people now." Keanu was silent for a moment. "Good," he finally said. "That's all that matters." But Sandra felt something deeper in his tone. A quiet ache, a memory of pain behind his calm words. She wondered what had made him so gentle, so patient, so quietly kind. That night she made a promise to herself. She would find out. Not because she was curious about the actor, but because she wanted to understand the man whose smallest actions could heal the world around him. She didn't yet know that her search for answers would take her to the edges of his past, to heartbreak, loss, and one unforgettable truth that would change her own mission in life forever. The story behind the silence days turned into weeks, and Sandra could not shake off the memory of that night at the diner. The way Keanu had spoken so softly with no expectation, no pride. It was as if kindness was his second nature, something that flowed through him like quiet light. Yet behind his calm eyes, she had sensed something deeper, a silence that carried pain. One morning, during a charity event for orphaned children in downtown Los Angeles, Sandra saw Keanu again. He was standing near the back, not surrounded by cameras or bodyguards, just helping volunteers hand out food. No one even realized who he was until a child pointed and whispered his name. She walked up to him. "You always show up when nobody's watching," she said. He smiled faintly. "That's when it matters most." The simplicity of his words touched her. As they served food together, Sandra noticed how he bent down to speak to every child, making them laugh, listening as if they were the most important people in the world. She couldn't help but wonder how someone so famous could stay so humble, so invisible when he wanted to be. After the event, they sat on the curb outside the hall, sipping bottled water. It was one of those quiet Los Angeles evenings when the sky glowed orange and pink. "You know," Sandra began softly, "that night at the diner, you didn't just help that man. You changed something in me." Keanu looked surprised. "How so?" "I started visiting shelters," she said. "I talked to people, listened to their stories. I realized how many of them don't want money. They just want to be seen. That night showed me what true kindness looks like." Keanu nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's strange," he said after a pause, "how one small thing can start something so big. But that's how kindness works. It travels quietly." She studied his face. There was a weight in his tone, a hidden sadness. "You talk like someone who's lost a lot," she said gently. He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sun was slipping away. "Everyone loses something," he finally whispered. "What matters is what we do with the pain." Those words lingered in Sandra's mind. She wanted to ask more, but something told her not to. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was protection, a wall built around memories too fragile to expose. A few days later, Sandra was filming on set when she received a call from a volunteer she had met at the event. "There's a man here," the volunteer said. "He said he knows you." "Said you and Keanu helped him once." Sandra's heart skipped. "The man from the diner?" "Yes," the volunteer replied. "But there's more. He wants you both to come see something." That evening, she drove across town to a small warehouse near Venice Beach. When she entered, she froze. Inside, volunteers were packing supplies, blankets, hygiene kits, food boxes, with a small sign on the wall that read, "The Chance Foundation." The man from the diner walked up, his eyes bright. "It's because of that night," he said. "I started this. We help anyone who just needs a chance. The same way you both helped me." Sandra was speechless. Tears welled in her eyes. "Where's Keanu?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Probably helping someone else right now." Later that night, Sandra found Keanu outside the same diner where it had all begun. He was sitting quietly, reading a note someone had left by the window. Perhaps another stranger's story. She sat beside him without speaking. He turned to her. "You found him, didn't you?" She nodded. "He started a foundation. Because of you." Keanu looked down at his hands, almost embarrassed. "Because of us," he corrected. Sandra smiled. "You always deflect praise." He chuckled softly. "Praise doesn't heal anyone. Actions do." But then his smile faded. He stared at the table, lost in thought. "There's something I never told you," he said quietly. She leaned closer. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Years ago, when I was struggling, someone showed me the same kindness. A stranger helped me when I had nothing. I never found out who they were. I guess I've been trying to repay that kindness ever since." Sandra's chest tightened. "So that's why you do it?" He nodded slowly. "Because one small act can save a person's entire world. I learned that the hard way." His eyes glistened slightly, but he looked away before she could see too much. The air between them grew heavy, not uncomfortable, but full of meaning. Then he said something that would stay with her forever. Kindness isn't about feeling good. It's about keeping the light alive when the world tries to take it away. Sandra didn't respond. She didn't need to. She just sat with him in silence, letting his words sink deep into her heart. That night as she drove home, she made a quiet promise. She would turn her fame, her influence, and her heart toward something more lasting. She would make kindness her mission, just like he had. What she didn't know was that Keanu's past held a much deeper reason for his compassion. A reason so heartbreaking and powerful that when she would discover it, her life and her mission would never be the same again. The kindness he never spoke about. The next few weeks were a blur for Sandra. Every time she closed her eyes, she kept seeing Keanu's quiet face at the diner, the way he said those words. Keep the light alive when the world tries to take it away. It wasn't just a quote to him. It was a truth built from something painful, something real. She decided to learn more about his past, not out of curiosity, but because she felt that understanding his pain might teach her how to help others better. One evening, while waiting on set between scenes, she spoke to a mutual friend, an old stunt coordinator who had worked with Keanu in his early years. "You want to know why Keanu does what he does?" the man asked softly. Sandra nodded. "Not for gossip, I feel like there's a story there, something that drives him." The man sighed, then leaned closer. "It's not my place to tell, but you should know. His kindness comes from loss, real loss. When his sister was fighting cancer years ago, he spent almost every night in the hospital with her. He never told anyone. He donated quietly to the hospital, volunteered as a cleaner sometimes so the nurses could rest. After she got better, he kept doing it for other patients. He never wanted credit." Sandra's throat tightened. "He went through all that, and still smiles like that?" "He smiles," the man said, "but it's the kind of smile that hides more love than pain." That night, Sandra couldn't stop thinking about what she'd learned. She remembered how Keanu always avoided fame's noise, how he sat with strangers, how he looked at people as if every soul had value. His kindness wasn't random, it was survival. It was how he kept his heart from breaking completely. A few days later, Sandra called Keanu. "Can we meet?" she asked. They met at a quiet park near the ocean, just before sunset. Keanu arrived on his motorcycle, helmet tucked under his arm, the wind tugging at his hair. He smiled softly when he saw her, but there was something weary in his eyes. They sat on a wooden bench facing the waves. For a while, they didn't speak. Only the sound of the sea filled the space between them. Finally, Sandra said, "I know about your sister. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." Keanu was silent for a long time. Then he said, "You didn't pry. You cared. That's rare." She turned toward him. "You could have shut yourself off from the world after that." "Most people would have. But you chose kindness." He looked out at the horizon. "Pain makes people build walls," he said. "But walls don't stop storms, they just trap the rain inside." "Kindness? It's how I let the rain out." Sandra's eyes softened. "You make it sound simple." He smiled faintly. "It's not. Some days it hurts to care. But when you stop caring, the world gets darker." As the waves shimmered in gold, Sandra realized that this wasn't just about Keanu's kindness. It was about healing. He had turned his grief into something beautiful, something that gave light to others, and she wanted to do the same. "You said once that one small act can save a person's world," she said quietly. "What if we did something bigger? Something that gives people that same chance you gave that man at the diner?" Keanu looked at her with quiet curiosity. "What do you have in mind?" She hesitated. "A foundation, not one built on names or fame, one that connects people through small acts of kindness. We could fund schools, help struggling artists, train people for new jobs, just build hope where the world forgot it." Keanu thought for a moment. "You want to create a kindness chain?" "Yes," she said. "A living chain." He nodded slowly. "Then we start small." Like that night at the diner. For weeks, they met secretly. No press, no teams, just the two of them planning quietly. They visited shelters, community centers, and hospitals, asking what people truly needed. They listened, not as celebrities, but as ordinary souls. And soon, an idea was born: the Living Light Project. Its purpose was simple: to help people rebuild their lives, not with money alone, but with opportunities, mentorship, and compassion. Every person they helped was asked to pass on one act of kindness to someone else. One evening, as they reviewed plans in a small cafe, Sandra noticed Keanu staring out the window again. His expression was calm, but there was sadness behind it. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He smiled softly. "Just remembering someone I never thanked." "Who?" "The nurse who used to read to my sister when I couldn't be there," he said. "I never even knew her name. I think she's the reason I still believe in good people." Sandra reached out and placed her hand over his. "You became that kind of person for others." Keanu's eyes met hers, quiet and sincere. "Maybe that's the only way to repay kindness, by becoming it." Their foundation quietly grew. Within months, it had connected dozens of volunteers and touched hundreds of lives. But neither of them knew that the true test of their mission was coming soon, one that would force them to choose between fame, truth, and compassion. And in that moment, Sandra would discover that Keanu's greatest act of kindness had never been seen, never spoken of, and never meant to be revealed. The secret kindness no one knew. Months passed, and the Living Light Project began to grow quietly, like sunlight spreading across dark corners of forgotten lives. Keanu and Sandra continued to meet behind the scenes, avoiding attention, funding projects anonymously, and guiding people who had fallen through the cracks of fame and fortune. What started with one man at a diner had now become a quiet movement of kindness that touched people around the world. A carpenter in Chicago rebuilt a widow's home. A teacher in Mexico started free evening classes. A nurse in India opened a small health center for children. Each one of them wrote a small note that read, "Someone once helped me. Now it's my turn." But for Sandra, the real story was Keanu himself. The more she worked beside him, the more she saw how deeply his heart carried both pain and peace. He never took credit, never let his name appear on any list, and always insisted on meeting the people quietly, without cameras. One late afternoon, as they were visiting a small rehabilitation center they had funded, Sandra noticed something unusual. One of the children, a boy in a wheelchair, handed Keanu a drawing, a picture of a man giving light to another. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for saving my brother." Keanu's face froze for a moment. His eyes softened, and then he whispered, "What's your brother's name?" The boy smiled shyly. "Adam. He said a man on a bike helped him after the crash. He never forgot it." Sandra looked at Keanu, confused. "You know him?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Years ago, before you and I started this, I saw a car overturned on a highway. No one had stopped. I pulled over, helped a young man crawl out, and waited with him until help came. He was scared, thought he was going to die. I told him not to close his eyes." Sandra's eyes widened. "That was him?" Keanu nodded again, quiet and humble. "I never knew what happened after." "I just hoped he lived," the nurse nearby confirmed. That Adam had survived after months in recovery, and had later volunteered at the same center. That was now helping other children. Sandra felt tears well in her eyes. "You changed his life, Keanu, and you didn't even know it." He looked away, whispering softly, "Sometimes we're not meant to know. Kindness isn't about seeing the result. It's about planting the seed." That night, as they left the center, Sandra couldn't shake off the feeling that there was still more to his story. Something he carried quietly that even she hadn't seen yet. She had grown close to him through their work, trusting him not just as a friend, but as a guiding light. Yet there were moments when he disappeared without warning, days when no one could reach him. One morning, during a board meeting for the foundation, Sandra noticed his chair was empty again. His assistant whispered that he had gone out of town. She didn't ask where. She had learned that when Keanu went quiet, it was usually for a reason that came from his heart. But one evening, curiosity led her to find out. She traced one of his quiet trips to a small town outside San Francisco. There, she found him sitting alone outside a hospice center, talking to an elderly man who looked frail but peaceful. She didn't interrupt. She just watched from a distance. When the man smiled and reached out to hold Keanu's hand, she could see the warmth in both their eyes. When Keanu finally left, she approached him on the quiet path. "You help people even when no one's watching," she said softly. He gave a tired smile. "That's when it feels most real." "Who was he?" she asked gently. Keanu sighed. "Someone who used to visit my sister when I couldn't. He was the janitor at her hospital. When she passed, he sent me a note that said, 'Your sister is free now, but don't close your heart.' I come here once a year to thank him. He says I don't need to, but I can't help it." Sandra felt her heart ache. "You never told anyone." "Some things lose their purity when spoken aloud," he said quietly. They stood there under the fading light, and Sandra realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This was not an actor doing charity work, not a celebrity trying to make headlines. This was a man healing his soul by helping others heal theirs. The next day, while driving back, Sandra looked out the car window and whispered to herself, "He's not just kind. He's selfless." When she returned home, she began planning something without telling him. She wanted to surprise him, something that would let the world see the beauty of what they were doing, but also protect his humility. Weeks later, she arranged a small gathering in Los Angeles. It wasn't a grand event, no reporters, no banners. Just the people they had helped through the Living Light project. She invited Keanu under the pretense of discussing new plans. When he walked into the room, he froze. Around 50 people stood there, some smiling, some crying, some holding photos or small handmade gifts. They were all people he had helped directly or indirectly. The man from the diner was there, the nurse's son, the boy in the wheelchair, the carpenter, the teacher, the mother he once bought groceries for. They all stood silently until one of them stepped forward and said, "We just wanted to say thank you." Keanu looked at Sandra, stunned. "You did this?" She nodded softly. "They wanted to meet the man who showed them what kindness really means." He blinked back tears. "I don't deserve this." Sandra placed a hand on his arm. "You do, because every one of them is proof that one quiet act can echo across the world." For the first time in years, Keanu couldn't speak. His eyes filled with emotion as the people began to share their stories, how his kindness had saved them, inspired them, or simply made them believe in good again. Sandra watched him in silence, realizing that this was the moment that defined who he truly was, not the movies, not the fame, but the humanity he carried when no one was watching. What neither of them knew that night was that this gathering would lead to something even greater, a challenge that would test their faith in kindness when tragedy struck again, shaking everything they had built together. And in that storm, the true meaning of the living light would be revealed. When the storm returned, the night of the gathering stayed in Keanu's heart for weeks. He didn't like attention, but this time it felt different. It wasn't about being seen, it was about seeing how kindness had multiplied through others. Still, when he returned home, he sat by the window for hours, lost in thought. The faces, the gratitude, the love, all of it reminded him of something he had quietly buried years ago. One evening, as rain tapped against his apartment window, Keanu received a call from Sandra. Her voice sounded worried. "The Living Light Center in Northern California was damaged in the storm last night. The children are safe, but the building's gone." Keanu closed his eyes. "I'll go there tomorrow. I'm coming too," Sandra said. They arrived the next morning to find the small center nearly destroyed. Volunteers were cleaning debris, but their faces showed exhaustion and heartbreak. This was the first community house they had built, a place where people came for shelter, meals, and quiet hope. Now it was a ruin of shattered glass and soaked pages. A little girl ran to Sandra, clutching a soaked notebook. "This is all that's left," she whispered. Inside were drawings and notes from the children. "Thank you for giving us a place to smile." Sandra knelt down, hugging her tightly. Keanu stood beside them, silent but determined. He turned to one of the volunteers. "How much will it take to rebuild?" "Too much," the man said softly. "We don't have the funds anymore. The insurance won't cover everything. Maybe it's time to stop." Keanu shook his head. "No, kindness doesn't stop when things fall apart. That's when it's needed most." The man hesitated. We've lost everything. Keanu looked around, voice steady. No, we haven't. We still have people. We still have light. That night, under flickering lamps, Keanu and Sandra sat with the volunteers, working on plans to rebuild from scratch. Keanu insisted they rebuild without public help or attention. If people know it's us, it'll become news. This was never meant to be a show. But Sandra saw the growing strain in him. He was spending his own savings, traveling constantly, pushing himself without rest. One evening, after another long day at the site, she found him sitting alone by the broken wall, looking at a small photo in his hand. "Who's that?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "My sister. This was taken before she got sick." Sandra sat beside him. "You've carried her everywhere, haven't you?" "Everywhere," he said. "Every act of kindness I do. It's for her. I used to think losing her broke me, but maybe it just opened something inside me instead." Sandra felt tears rise. "She'd be proud of what you've done." Keanu's voice trembled slightly. "She once told me the smallest candle still burns in the darkest night. When I help someone, it feels like her light is still alive." The silence that followed was soft, sacred. The rain had stopped, but puddles glimmered under the moonlight. Over the next few weeks, the rebuilding began. Sandra arranged new sponsors quietly, pretending they were anonymous donors. Keanu worked on site every day, painting walls, carrying bricks, and laughing with the children. The new center slowly came to life, a symbol of resilience born from loss. But then, another twist came, something neither of them expected. Popular news outlets somehow learned about the Living Light project and ran. A headline, "Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock secretly fund Global Kindness Foundation." Photos of them at the site spread everywhere. Reporters swarmed the center asking questions, taking pictures. Sandra tried to calm the crowd, but Keanu looked heartbroken. He quietly stepped aside, avoiding cameras. "You should have told them it wasn't about us," he said gently. "I didn't," she replied. "Someone leaked it. I tried to stop it." His eyes lowered. "The moment people turn kindness into headlines, it stops being pure." She placed a hand on his arm. "But maybe it's not all bad. Maybe people will see this and feel inspired." He paused. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll just see two actors trying to look good." She looked at him earnestly. "The truth will shine through, Keanu. People feel sincerity, even when the noise is loud." But she could tell he was hurt. Not angry, just disappointed that something so personal had become public. The next few days were overwhelming. Interviews flooded in. Charities called for partnerships, and social media exploded with praise. Sandra handled most of it, but Keanu disappeared again. He stopped answering calls. After 3 days, Sandra found him back at the diner, the same one where everything had started. He was sitting in the same booth, coffee untouched. "You're running again," she said softly, sitting across from him. "I'm not running," he replied quietly. "I'm remembering why we started. This was never about fame. It was about small, unseen moments." "Then let's go back to that," she said. "Let's use what's happening to reach more people, but keep the soul of it the same." He looked at her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, but promise me something. Anything. No matter how big this gets, never forget the first man at the diner, because it started with him. With a stranger who needed one chance." She smiled softly. "I'll never forget." What happened next surprised them both. The viral attention brought in unexpected donations, not from corporations, but from ordinary people who wrote messages like, "Thank you for reminding us that kindness still exists." With that support, they rebuilt the center faster than anyone expected. On the opening day, the children gathered with candles, forming a circle as Sandra and Keanu stood quietly in the middle. A volunteer whispered, "Would you like to say something?" Keanu looked at the flickering candles and said softly, "No words, just light." And as the room glowed with warm, silent flames, Sandra realized something powerful. The storm had not destroyed their mission. It had purified it, but just when everything seemed peaceful again, a letter arrived that would bring back Keanu's deepest pain. forcing him to face the one act of kindness that changed him forever, the one he had never shared, even with her. The letter that revealed everything. The morning light spilled softly through the curtains of Sandra's kitchen as she sipped her coffee and opened the envelope that had arrived with no name. No return address, only a wax seal marked with a single small symbol, a candle flame. Inside was a letter, written in neat, fading handwriting. It began simply, "Dear Mr. Reeves, you once helped me when I had lost everything. I never knew your name that night, only your kindness. I promised myself that if I ever found you, I'd tell you the truth about what your act meant. I owe you more than you will ever know." The letter continued, describing a story that shook Sandra to the core, years ago, long before the Living Light Project. Before fame had softened into wisdom, Keanu had stopped on a snowy night outside Toronto, where a car had crashed on a deserted road. He had pulled the driver out, covered her with his coat, and stayed with her until help arrived. The woman had been in despair that night, planning to end her life after losing her home and job. But his quiet compassion, his refusal to leave, changed her mind. She recovered, rebuilt her life, and became a volunteer therapist for at-risk youth. The letter ended with one final revelation. "The hospital where your sister was treated was where I later worked. She told me once, before she passed, that her brother was her light. She made me promise to write you one day, to tell you she was never afraid because you kept her believing in kindness." I think this was her way of keeping her promise. Sandra's hands trembled as she read. She could barely breathe. She folded the letter carefully and called Keanu. When he arrived, she didn't say a word. She simply handed him the envelope. He opened it, began to read, and his shoulders slowly slumped. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. After a long silence, he whispered, "She made her promise." His voice cracked. "She really did." Tears rolled down his cheeks silently. He didn't hide them, didn't wipe them away. He just stared out the window, his expression a mix of grief and peace. Sandra placed her hand on his. "She never left you, Keanu. She just passed the light on." For a long moment, they sat in silence, two friends bound not by fame or work, but by something deeper, a shared belief that kindness connects every soul, even beyond time and loss. That evening, they drove together to the Living Light Center, the rebuilt one now glowing with warmth and laughter. Volunteers were preparing food, children were painting on the walls, and candles flickered on every table. Keanu walked through slowly, smiling at each person, pausing to listen, to help, to encourage. He wasn't the movie star here. He was just a man continuing his sister's promise. In one corner, a young woman was sketching quietly. She looked up shyly when she saw them. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "my mother told me about you. She said you once saved her life on a snowy road." Keanu froze. "Your mother?" The girl nodded. "She's the one who sent that letter. She said you reminded her that even in the coldest night, someone cared." Keanu smiled through tears. "She saved me too without even knowing." The girl tilted her head. "How?" "Because when you remind someone that kindness still exists," he said softly, "you remind them they're not alone." The room grew still for a moment, as if every heart there understood what those words meant. Then a small boy raised his candle high and said, "For everyone who keeps the light alive." One by one, everyone lifted their candles. Sandra's eyes shimmered as she looked at Keanu. He nodded gently, his face peaceful in the golden glow. And then, for the first time, he spoke openly, not as a celebrity, but as a man who had learned what true compassion meant. "Kindness isn't a grand act," he said quietly. "It's a whisper that survives storms, a small flame that passes from one person to another. My sister taught me that. Every person here, every smile, every helping hand, is proof that light never dies. It just travels." Sandra felt her throat tighten. In that moment, she realized her mission had changed forever. She no longer wanted to use fame to impress people. She wanted to use it to ignite hope. Just as Keanu had done, after everyone left, they stood outside together, watching the candles burn inside the center's windows. The night was calm, the air cool, the stars soft and endless. Sandra broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what she'd say if she saw all this? Keanu smiled faintly. She'd probably laugh and say, "You finally learned to share your light." They both laughed quietly. Then Sandra said something that made him pause. "You know, you changed my mission too. Before you, I used to think kindness was something you planned. Now I know. It's something you live." Keanu looked at her, the gentle sincerity in his eyes returning. "You didn't learn it from me, Sandra. You already had it. I just reminded you." They stood there in silence again, the candles flickering behind them like a constellation of human hearts. As the wind brushed softly through the trees, Keanu whispered one final truth, words that would stay with Sandra forever. "We don't need to shine for the world to see us. We just need to shine so others don't walk in darkness." She nodded, tears glistening. "And that's what we'll keep doing." As they walked away from the center, the sign above the door gently caught the glow of the candles. It read in simple letters, "The Living Light, a place where kindness never ends." And in that moment, the circle was complete. What began as a quiet act at a lonely diner had grown into a wave of compassion reaching across the world. A living light passed from one heart to another. The story of Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's mission wasn't about fame, nor about perfection. It was about the small, quiet acts that heal unseen wounds. Because sometimes one small act of kindness doesn't just change someone's day, it changes the world.